My name is Margie Mulligan, and I was asked to moderate tonight's talk by Dr. John Rebman. First off, if you'd like to make a donation to support Dr. Redman's research, a link will be included in the chat, or you can find it on their website, CNPS website, San Diego chapter. You can find a link there to donate. So John will be answering questions at the end of the talk, so please put questions in the Q&A, which you can see at the bottom. Try not to put them in the chat because I might not notice those. So Dr. Rebman has been the Mary and Dallas Clark Endowed Curator of the Botany Department at the San Diego Natural History Museum for a quarter of a century. He is a plant taxonomist and conducts extensive floristic research in Baja California and in San Diego and Imperial counties in California. He has over 37,000 botanical collections, mostly in these areas. Isn't that a lot? Wow. Despite these successes, he is a terrible procrastinator. While some people procrastinate by binge watching Netflix or, hours on social media, he is hours on iNaturalist, as many of you know. He has identified over 300,000 observations since 2014. He has a serious problem. And instead of answering emails, or returning voicemails, as you all know, he can often be found in a wormhole in the collections, finding new species to science. And I think this fall he found at least 5. So without further ado, I'd like to present, we can safely say, the top botanist in our region, Dr. John Rebman.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Margie. Let me get right into the talk this evening. See if I can get this going. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. But tonight I'm going to give you kind of a full talk on some work I've been doing rediscovering lost plant species in Baja California, and also some of the research and discoveries right here at home in San Diego County. So let's get started. And I do want to say thank you to the local chapter of CNPS for inviting me to give this presentation this evening, and also for facilitating it, because this these remote virtual talks actually have a lot of technology behind them. And so I want to thank them for that. Let's start off. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cough this evening. But so after many years of work, and since Margie had told you I'd been at the museum for almost 25 years now, a couple of years ago, we put together an annotated checklist of all of the plants of Baja California. And this is based on scientific specimens, and it's everything that I knew at the time. And I had 2 amazing staff members, Judy Gibson and Karen Rich, that helped me compile all this information, not only from our collection, our herbarium collection, but also from other herbaria and from literature, and we put it all together into this publication. And you can say, well, so what? What does that actually give us as far as information? So what that it gives us is for every species that we know, or every taxon that we know to occur in Baja California and the adjacent islands that are associated with the peninsula, then we have given a voucher specimen, which is a kind of proof of evidence that that species actually occurs on the peninsula, information on it as far as its distribution in our region, and wider distribution, a common name in English and in Spanish if we could find one. Oftentimes there wasn't one. And synonymy, and I've actually wrote about every single taxon, something about its distribution or about its taxonomy or problems, etc. And so putting that whole thing together gives us the idea of what the total diversity is for the peninsula. And now this is only to date. We constantly find new records, new species, etc. in the region. But we know right now that there are just under 4,000 different kinds of plants in Baja California. We also know that the northern state is documented with a few more than the southern state, but the southern state of Baja California Sur actually has more endemism at this point than the northern state. And I think one of the key factors that came out of this is the information on endemism. So about 26% of the native flora of Baja California is endemic, which means that it is restricted to and only found in that area. And that is an extremely high percentage that you find mostly on islands. To have it on a landlocked piece of like the peninsula is pretty astounding. So we also have been working on this Baja Flora website, and you can use this, and everything that is in that checklist is actually completely available on Baja Flora as well. There are tens of thousands of digital photographs of plant species and of landscapes, historic maps. There are specimen scans, there are checklists, there are field notes, you name it. We've tried to put everything together into this area to give people more knowledge about the plants of the peninsula. And one of the most important parts of that from the checklist, and you can download the checklist for free from right off of the website of Baja Flora. It's a PDF, and you can download it, and you will see that there is a voucher, a herbarium voucher, and each one of those we have digitized. So you can actually see one of every single thing that we know to occur on the peninsula. In fact, one of my volunteers has been going through that collection, and these older digital scans were not high resolution, but we're just about ready to put up all the high resolution ones where you'll be able to zoom in and see hairs on the specimens and really take a closer look at these specimens in detail. And of course, the field photos. So you can look up, this is a monotypic endemic genus called Culturella capitata. It occurs only in the southern part of the peninsula. It is a beautiful little species, and you can see growth habits, fruits, flowers, specimen scans, and even like you can do a map distribution to see where it might curve if you actually would like to see that species in the wild. So as far as conservation is concerned, the biggest thing that comes out of that checklist is that we have a much better understanding of what plants are extinct in the peninsula, which ones are lost to us for science at the moment, and which things have been rediscovered. So for example, we know there are about 5 to 6 species that are extinct. You say, well, wait, you got a question mark there. Well, that question mark comes from a historic specimen that was collected on Guadalupe Island, which is a species that was never described. And unfortunately, the only specimen from the late 1800s that was collected of it doesn't exist. It can't be found. It was at the Gray Herbarium at Harvard. And so that one we don't know. We assume that it was an endemic species to Guadalupe Island, but we have no idea really what it is. But we know that at least 5 endemic taxa from the peninsula are currently lost. That means we do not know if they still exist or not. About 121 native species in the region were only documented one time in history on the peninsula with one historic voucher. And of those, probably 16 are likely extirpated due to livestock and urbanization in different areas, especially on Guadalupe Island and northwestern Baja. But the good news is we also know that at least 24 of those species and 14 endemics have been rediscovered recently. And that gives you some idea what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. But here's an example of extinction. So these are 2 historic specimens. One of them is Hesperolea palmeri on the left, and that was in the olive family, and it was a shrub that was collected once. And when Edward Palmer actually collected it in 1875, he said there are only 3 shrubs here at this time, and that the goats were already on the island and they were decimating the vegetation, and actually had been for almost 100 years at that point. And so these have not been found since. That or the Castanea guadalupensis on the right were last seen in 1898 and 1875. So right now it's possible these could show up since the goats have been removed from Guadalupe Island, but right now we consider them to be extinct. How did I get involved in this? Well, I've been working on the peninsula for a long time, and in I think it was 1992 was the very first time I rediscovered a plant on the peninsula. I was a graduate student at Arizona State, and I was working on my doctorate on the choyas of the peninsula. And I was on a field trip, and I landed in the Sierra de San Francisco in the center of the peninsula. And I collected this shrub I didn't know what it was when I collected it, but I went back and actually ID'd it and keyed it out and found out it was Eisenhardia peninsularis, which was only collected by Brandegee in the late 1800s. And so that was kind of a thrill for me, and that got me involved. And I then went to the Sierra de la Libertad. I went to a lot of field trips throughout the entire peninsula, but one of the trips and one of the areas I love on the peninsula is the Sierra de la Libertad. It is a massive unexplored mountain range that you basically have to have mules to get in and spend weeks exploring to really get a better idea of what's there. And sometimes when we rediscover things, it actually gives us lots of discoveries. But how would we even know like where Brandegee was and that kind of thing? And this is something that people don't realize. What we have on Baja Flora is we have actually digitized and geolocated historic maps of people like Brandegee during his 1889 journey. You can actually see his trail, and you can change the opacity of that and see what the current satellite photography is today, including Nelson and Goldman from 1905, and many other places and place names, old maps that we've used to try and rediscover and find some of these lost places on the peninsula. Now, one of the places where I found a lost species, or I figured it had to be because there was an earlier collection, is in the southern part of the peninsula in the top of the Sierra de la Giganta, in an area called the Llanas de Quiquiwi. And this is basically like we have vernal pools here in Southern California. These are autumnal lakes. They are giant lakes that fill up with summer rainfall rather than winter rainfall like what we have. And they, if we have hurricanes that go through this area, or if they just get enough summer moisture, they will fill up. There are plants that come up as these recede. However, if you look on the landscape, there are various ranches here. And when we were here surveying, about every type of livestock you can imagine, we're out here feeding on these dry lake beds. And that is a problem because some species cannot take that kind of pressure from livestock grazing, sorry. But here's the species we were looking for there. This is Trichocoronus wrightii wigginsii, and it was lost. And we found, after a couple days of searching, we found only 13 plants. And unfortunately, this is one of those species that has to actually come off the surface of the ground high enough to flower. And that is a problem in an area where you have a lot of livestock grazing. And so the future of this species is really uncertain. And we do have some projects as soon as we can get moving again. With Dr. Sula Vanderplank, we have some joint binational projects where we are trying to seed bank some of these extremely rare species, not just cross-border things, but actually some of the rarest of the rare in Baja. And we get the seeds to Mexico City, to UNAM, and also to Kew Botanical Gardens so that they are actually held in a conservation seed bank. So this is one that we have not done yet, but it is definitely our intent to get back to many of these really rare species and try and get them seed banked. But when you're actually rediscovering, sometimes you find things you weren't expecting. So you found like fields of Lythrum bryantii, which is a species that is localized to that area. And other species we don't see very often, Aragrostis reptans. We do see Marsilia kind of up and down the peninsula. But this Eryngium is not what we thought it was, and it is very likely a brand new species. So if you know anyone working on Eryngium, that's something that still needs to be worked out at this point. But on another little kind of dry lake bed just to the north of that, we found this species, and it was not described. And I worked with some Mexican collaborators that are specialized in this genus, which is the milk vetches. And this is the genus Astragalus, and we described this last year as Astragalus commanduensis. And it is in the Commandu area, but only known from one lake bed. And so it's an extremely rare plant at this point. Now, kind of using that information of working over the years and trying to rediscover, I thought it's time to actually formalize this a little bit more. And so I put together a proposal, and I kind of tapped into my collaborators in Baja California, and we selected 15 species that are endemic to the peninsula that are only known from one historic voucher, and that is the type specimen. Most of those were over 100 years old. And so we didn't know if they were extinct, if there's still a possibility for them to exist. We just had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. And they were selected from throughout the entire peninsula. And so you can see up from the northwest to the central, all the way down to the Cape region. And these are the last time they were collected and what the species are that we were selected. So just, I'm gonna jump ahead just to give you an idea, but we were able to rediscover 9 of 13 that we have searched for. And there are reasons we haven't looked for the other ones. And there's also, I should point out, this Phenophyllus, Margie will be very interested in this since she gets a lot of credit here, but that's one that I still didn't consider to be rediscovered, at least not for Baja California, and I'll talk about that later. So I tapped into the collaborators. These are some of my good friends and colleagues at CIBNOR in La Paz, and also my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jose Delgadillo at UABC in Ensenada. So used basically these botanists that run the collections on the peninsula, and we went out with students and had a great time trying to rediscover many of these species. And some of the examples are like this. Now, none of the species on this list are actually listed as rare and endangered or anything from Mexico. They're not on what's called the NOM. And that is the Norma Oficial, which is all their list of rare, endangered, threatened species. None of these are on there because it's hard to get new things on there unless we know something about them. How many populations there were, how many are threatened, how many are gone. These are things we only knew from one historic specimen. So we need more information to actually get them put onto that rare and endangered list. An example is this astragalus. There are a lot of astragalus species on the peninsula, but this is one that had only been collected once at Lagoon Head, which actually is near Jesus Maria, just north of Guerrero Negro. You wouldn't find it on maps today, but you can find it on the historic map. And it was collected once again by Edward Palmer in March of 1889. So we wanted to go back to this place and look for it. And we did, we found it. It was not an uncommon species, but it is highly restricted to one substrate and one little hill here. And it is a kind of a weird type of soil that occurs on a little, not mountain, but big hill at the ocean. And no other place seemed to have this particular species. There are a lot of other astragalus species, but not this one. So it was quite abundant here. And we were able to do this with other colleagues and land managers. These are some of the CONAMP officials that run the Valle de los Cirios reserve. And this is in the reserve, and now they're aware of it, and hopefully it can be protected into the future. Some of them are not so easy, though. This is Dr. Alfonso Medel from CIBNOR, and this is a species I looked for many times near El Triunfo. And it was collected once in 1930. It's a little annual in the Verbenaceae. It's Boucher flavellifolium. And this species, that area, if you know El Triunfo, it's an old mining area. It has lots of different substrates, and many times species are found only on one substrate or another, like one certain geological rock type, etc. So I've been all throughout this area hiking my rear end off, trying to rediscover this species with no luck. Then one time Alfonso and I were there and we're like, we searched for hours. We're like, let's go look for some weeds in the city, in the town of El Triunfo. And so we were walking around, I happened to sprain my ankle, and we're like, we're gonna have to walk back. So we got on the main road, came up to the church in town, and right next to the church's parking lot in the ditch, this species was occurring. So I think Jones back in 1930, when he said El Triunfo, he didn't mean miles and miles, he meant El Triunfo, nowhere else. Another species from the Cape region is this Eriogonum. And the reason this got on my radar is Jack Reveal, who's a specialist in the genus Eriogonum, had said, hey, do you know where this Cerro Calaveras is? There's a specimen of an Eriogonum that was collected once, that hasn't been found again, and I'm positive it's a new species. Well, we didn't know at that time, and I didn't get a chance to actually look for it when he was alive, unfortunately. And then I got this grant money, and I talked to Dr. Jose Luis Leon de la Luz down in La Paz, said, hey, we're going to go look for an Eriogonum in the Cape regions. There's no Eriogonum, there's no buckwheats in the Cape region because it's a much more tropical setting, and buckwheats are very much in Mediterranean. Their diversification has gone crazy in northern Baja and in California. But as you go down the peninsula, they peter out, and by the southern part, there are no species left. And he didn't believe we could even find one. I said, well, there's one historic specimen, and it's on this strange mountain, kind of just north of Cabo San Lucas. You can actually see it as you go to the airport at San Jose del Cabo. And it's granite. It's a granite peak, which all of the Cape is pretty much granite, but it's kind of a little bit harder granite. And sure enough, this species, we found it, hundreds of individuals, but only in the cracks of this one rock, and have not found it anywhere else. And so this species is not described because Reveal never got a chance to actually describe it. And so hopefully Jose Luis, and we will do this in collaboration, he's gone back and got flowers and good material, so we should be able to describe this as a new species. I wanted to point out, this was originally collected by Anne Zwinger, and those of you who know literature on the peninsula, a desert country near the sea, a natural history of the Cape region is what she wrote. And she collected this specimen. She really wasn't a collector, but she collected this specimen, and it turns out it was a new taxon. But also, when you are rediscovering, sometimes you make discoveries, and we found a discovery, another rediscovery actually, of Mesotherium calinum here, which is a hyptis, and a new weed for the peninsula, unfortunately, Scoparia montevidensis, and also the endemic Quercus devia, which was much lower elevation and farther south than we knew that it occurred on the peninsula at this site as well. Other species are not so easy as well to rediscover. My predecessor, Reed Moran, made a collection in 1952 of a very strange salvia, and he named it Salvia malvifolia. He only collected it once, and he was on a boat trip, and he stopped at Coyote Bay in the Bahia de la Concepcion. And his label on his specimen just says, shaded canyon at 300 meters, Bahia de la Concepcion. Now, if you know this area, you know that that bay is about 30 miles long or more. And there are shaded canyons the entire length. So how in the heck do you refine this? Now, we were lucky that Reed Moran left his field notes behind, and we actually scanned them, and they're available online. And you read more about it, and you get a much better idea. We know that he stopped at Coyote Ranch, and he went in the canyon just to the north of that, and he was hiking. And below, he saw a broad wash with many small channels lost in cactus and brush. You're like, well, that doesn't seem like much. I got well up into a steep, narrow canyon at perhaps 1,000 or 1,500 feet with high vertical cliffs. He was looking for Dudleyus, but he actually collected this at the same time. But if you take a look using Google Earth and historic maps, we found this is that broad wash that he saw with the small channels. And unfortunately, it was about 120 degrees every day I was there at this time of year. And after 3 long, very hot, exhausting hikes, we went up all these side canyons without any luck. We made it to the very end of this canyon, which went up pretty dramatically. And we found about 20 plants of this salvia in that area. So we know that it still exists. And that is with Dr. Raimundo Dominguez Carena that was with me, and other volunteers that helped us on to actually refine this plant. And there it is. It's absolutely beautiful species. And if you know salvias in our area, you're like, that doesn't look like a salvia leaf. It is a very strange leaf form for a salvia, but it is truly a salvia. Now, as we were there, we also found some other interesting endemics like Brongniartia peninsularis, which is a legume with these flowers here. So actually a large shrub, and an acalypha called Acalypha saxicola, which is endemic only to Bahia de la Concepcion as well, at kind of lower elevation. But some cool things you find on the cliffs. This is not a rare plant by any means, but it's only restricted to the southern part and kind of along the Gulf and the islands. Eucnidea aurea, this orange flowered thing here. And that plant is a cliff dweller. It actually has stinging hairs, but you see the flowers, but notice the long pedicels. this is a species that lives on cliffs, and after flowering and fruiting, its pedicels elongate and actually plant its seeds in the cracks in the wall for the next generation. So it is a plant that actually plants its next generation on the cliff, which makes a lot of sense, because if you hold your flowers out for pollination and then they basically go to seeds, the seeds would drop straight down to the bottom of the cliff unless something is dispersing them. And here's a way that they actually plant them. Now, another species we were trying to find is Desmodium tastense, and tastense refers to the Sierra El Taste. And that El Taste, I'd been there only once, a couple of days, and I looked for this species but had no luck. And that was actually before I started this project. So we thought, let's go to the next mountain range right next to it. And this is all in the Cape region. And we went up to this area because this peak is called Cerro Salsipuedes. And there have been no botanists collecting. We've never found any collections from the top of Salsipuedes. And I can still tell you today, because it was impossible for us to make it there in one day, and we were still a long ways short of the top. We never found it either. We did find the lost Desmodium, and we found some other things that were fascinating. One of the biggest one was a tree, and this tree is Conzadia multiflora. Before this expedition into this little canyon, we only knew this tropical tree species from one individual on the eastern side of the Sierra here in the Cape. And it's a tropical tree, and we thought, okay, well, maybe somebody planted it, maybe it's just a relic left over, etc. But in this canyon we went up, it dominated the landscape. This one tropical tree that is nowhere else on the peninsula was all over in this canyon that we visited. And I can tell you, we need more expeditions to this area, because who knows what else is in this, on this peak and in the canyons below it. Some of the other things found here, Pelea ovata, which was also collected once basically by Brandegee. And one of the coolest plants, it was a new family for me, is the Podostemonaceae, Oceria coulteriana. It looks kind of like scum, like an alga type of thing, or a moss, but it's actually not. It's a flowering plant. It has tiny little flowers, as you can see here, and it grows in running water, right at the edges of running water. And so that is something that I got photos of. I couldn't find any photos of that species on the web, so that's a significant photo there. Another one that we rediscovered is Gallium carteri, and that is named after Annetta Carter, who is a botanist out of Berkeley. And she actually had a house and is one of our top explorers today in the Sierra de la Giganta. She's been dead for many years, actually before I arrived at the museum, but she would go out hiking and on mule trips into the Sierra de la Giganta and collect things like this gallium. And this gallium was not easy to get to. I had to recruit some locals, Trudy Angel of Loreto, and Che. He actually has a book about him. He's a fantastic and quite famous vaquero in this area, a great guide. And he knows the area like the back of his hands. He's from that region. He handled all the animals for us, and he got us to the area where this was growing, which is right here. And if you've been to Loreto and you look to the west, you see the high peaks here of the Gigantas, and this is where this plant grows. We only found a few individuals here because you are risking basically life and limb on these cliffs trying to find it. And I can tell you that there's no real threats to this species because there are almost no introduced animals up here. Very few things could actually get to them. So we know that it is at least protected, and it still exists in these really hard to get to little niches in the high mountains. Another species that is named for Annetta Carter, also from near Mission San Javier, is Lippia carteri. And this one was kind of a little bit of an enigma to us, because if you look on her labels, the local people were using this species to help with respiratory problems. In fact, we stopped at a ranch near that, and there was an elderly woman who was a local. She said that she had a lot of respiratory problems when she was a child, and they used to bathe her in basically a bath full of the leaves of this. And it helped her kind of survive those younger stages in her life. And so we thought, well, this species I'm sure is still here. Well, we could not find this, we couldn't find it. Finally, we found 20 individuals, but all of them looked like what you see on the left. And they are heavily grazed by mules and cattle and goats and everything. And the main road into San Javier actually bisects this population. So the future is not bright for the species. But we were talking to someone, and with Trudy's help, they said, using the common name Salvia real, they said, oh, well, somebody grows this in San Javier. I'm saying, well, because this is not much of a photograph on the left. And so we ended up going to the house, and sure enough, it was the right species. The flowers here, beautiful flowers, and the fruits are from that individual shrub, but there was only one plant growing. And I don't know that those fruits are actually viable from the one individual. And they haven't actually done anything with it. They're just interested in the vegetative parts of the leaves. And people come and give them a little money to take some leaves to use medicinally. So this has kind of roused a lot of the people in the local community there and also in Loreto. And I think there's been a big push now since I've left to actually go and fence off this population to try and protect it into the future. This is the only known population, and there were only basically 20 individuals there. Now, some species, when you rediscover them, you find out they're not what you thought they were. This is one called Salvia lapazana, and it was described in 1985. It was collected then. Actually, it was described just a couple of years ago. It was collected in 1985, right along the main trail that goes up from La Burrera to the Sierra de la Laguna. And everybody and their dog has hiked that, and it's shocking that they never actually found this plant. But the flower color in the description of it said that the flower colors were purple. Well, I've got pretty good color sense, and that's not purple and whatever. That is very, very blue. And they also said it was related to another species called Salvia peninsularis, which is actually kind of a magenta color. Unfortunately, the other type, one of the paratypes that was cited, we had in our collection. I took a close look at it. It didn't have flowers, but it happened to be a hyptis, now Condia to Frodes. So I'm like, flags are going up. There's something not quite right here. And we're pretty sure that this is actually just a collection of Salvia similis, which was already described. And it just had some misinformation on the label. And that will be something that we will just synonymize now. So it is not really a good taxon. We all went looking for it. We found these plants in the exact area. There are some endemics there, like Mimosa epitropica was a really restricted species in this region, but pretty sure that Lapazana is not a good taxon. Now, sometimes we don't have as much luck. And some species such as this Poliomyntha conjunctris was collected. It's the only member in the mint family in Baja California. It was collected by one of my heroes, George Lindsay. He was a cactologist, and he was at the museum as well as our director, and then he went to Cal Academy as a director. And he collected this back in 1937. It's a beautiful shrub with red flowers, but I cannot find his field notes anywhere. And the locality that he gives us says 5 miles southeast of Rancho San Antonio on the Buenos Aires Plains. Unfortunately, the most famous Rancho San Antonio in 1937 is not on the Buenos Aires Plains. It's about 20 miles from that. And there are plains there, and we don't know if he had misinterpreted, or maybe there's an old Rancho San Antonio that we can't find anywhere that is down closer there. So we have looked and looked with Dr. Jose Delgadillo from Ensenada, Dr. Dawn Lawson down here, she and one of my volunteers, John LaGrange. We basically searched and searched, and we found everything else that Lindsay had collected in this area, but could not find that plant. So I think someday someone will find it in the right area, but right now it is completely lost to our knowledge. Another one that is lost that was originally collected actually on the part of the trip of the HMS Sulphur in 1841 in Cabo San Lucas is Mitrocarpus linearis. And as you can imagine, things have changed a little bit in Cabo San Lucas since 1841. And not only that, this species is easily confused with these other species we found. This is Flora abundus, Mitrocarpus breviflorus, Mitrocarpus hirtus. And so it's possible that this species is still there, but those of you who know Cabo San Lucas, there are fences and resorts and houses and even more fences, and we can't access most of the area. A lot of it is privatized. And so hopefully the species is still there, but for now, we have to call it lost. Hopefully it's not extinct, but it is something that we will have to look out for in the future, and hopefully we'll get access to more areas in Cabo in the future. Another one that is lost is a monotypic genus. This is meaning it only has one species and it's endemic to the peninsula. It was collected by Townsend Brandegee in 1893 in the Sierra de la Laguna. And he didn't even give an exact date. And I'm worried that he actually put this locality on after the fact, because he was pretty good about his dates and his localities. And it has never been found again. This actual specimen is only a couple centimeters tall. It doesn't look like much. It is a really unique looking plant, and we have all looked for it in the Cape region and nobody has come up with it yet. It doesn't mean it's not there, but for right now, we have to say that it is lost. It is possibly extinct. Here's a botanical illustration of what it might have looked like in the field. And we were able to go to a new area of the peninsula. Some of you, if you're from Ensenada, know Carlos Gonzalez down here. We used some local guides, and this is Dr. Medel out of Cibnor in La Paz. And we got to go in a new part of the Sierra de la Laguna to the south of the main part. And what we found was absolutely stunning habitat that needs to be surveyed a lot more. We found things that only Brandegee had collected on the peninsula, like Anota hirta, Ophioglossum, Crotallopharoides, Selaginella pallescens have been collected a few times. But one of the most important ones is this little Stenotus. Stenotus is an endemic genus to Baja California Sur that has about 7 species. It's in the coffee family, the Rubiaceae. This one has tiny, look at my finger here, you can see how tiny the flowers are. And I always thought it was just a little depauperate individual of this species. And come to find out that I found this on the top of the Sierra Cacachilas, the top of the Sierra Legata, and now here in this area of the lagunas. I'm pretty sure it's an undescribed species. So new things come out of these rediscovery trips often. Some of the things we haven't found require special weather phenomena. So in March of 1934 or 1935, Forrest Shreve collected both of these glandularias in the southern part of the peninsula. And if you know the peninsula, you know that the northern part gets winter rain, the southern part gets summer rain. So if you actually have winter rain in the far south, that's a pretty strange and rare phenomenon. And so this species on the left has never been found again. And I'm waiting basically for that rare event of winter rain getting down to the southern part of the peninsula. It hasn't happened recently. So hopefully it'll happen again and we'll be able to find this species when it does. This one I would have called extinct. This is the little annual grass called Sphenophyllus interrupta, subspecies californica. And as you know, this is from Northwestern. It's actually from San Ramon area near San Quintin. And if you go out in our areas of San Diego, you know that we have a lot of non-native annual grasses, and they basically choke out everything of our native annual grasses. So it's hard to find annual grasses in our region. And this species there's only one place in San Ramon that is left. It's all basically put into agricultural fields and urban housing developments, etc. We looked and looked on this one little mesa, which actually has been degraded quite a bit. We found some great species, but never this species, this annual grass. We even took our kids there to look for them. That's Margie's 2 boys and my daughter out there helping us look for this lost species at San Ramon. But we couldn't find it there. And sure enough, these 2 amazing botanists here working in the Carlsbad area happened to find a grass that they were having trouble IDing. So they recruited me to help them with the ID of it. And that turned out to be that Sphenophyllus. And so it's not only a rediscovery of that annual grass, it's also the very first time it's ever been found in the United States. And right now, it's the only place that it occurs. But what's important about this, not only as a rediscovery, is we found out that it occurs where Acanthomintha, which is a very specialized soil type and of a type of clay. And so we now should be looking in areas of northwestern Baja and in San Diego for this little annual grass that might actually pop up on one of these sites. And so that will be our next quest this year and into the next, if we get enough rain, to look for this species. And hopefully we will find other populations. This population is tiny, but at least we know it exists. Now, what about San Diego County? We're still doing a lot of things in San Diego County. It's not just Baja California. We do a lot of field work here. And one of the projects that I've been working on with my staff for many, many years now, over 12 years of field work have been on Camp Pendleton. And as many of you know, as you drive up the 5, Camp Pendleton is a massive base. It's a beautiful spot. It goes from the coast, it goes up, it has vernal pools, grasslands, all different types of chaparral and coastal sage scrub, even as the Santa Margarita Mountains, at least part of them. And so in the 12 years, we have documented that base with over 10,000 herbarium specimens. We've doubled the known flora. Every year we were adding new records. So this is just, the problem with working on a flora is that they take a long period of time. Sometimes things don't show their head. Annual plants won't pop up every year. And so we were finding new records. Even this last year, we found 8 new records after 12 years of fieldwork, still finding new things, including this little grass, which was new to the county, not just new to the base. And so after all this work, there are over 1,100 different plants that occur on Pendleton. That is astounding diversity. And I would have to compare that to some states. That is a lot of diversity in one area. And so we at least know that about this base, and that has taken that many years to actually get a better handle on what the entire flora. And there's still things to be found there, absolutely for sure. Now during COVID, I was able to work on a few things and answer some questions that I've been dying about. So Dr. Mike Simpson recruited me, said, hey, this Western vervain, can you tell the difference between variety Scabrida and variety Lasiacus? So I pulled out, went to our collection, and since we weren't able to do a lot of things during COVID, the museum was open somewhat, not to the public, but barely to the staff. I could go in, pull out all the specimens, and actually take a closer look at them. And sure enough, I was able to find, oh yeah, I can actually find pubescence and measurement differences and other differences between those 2 varieties of Lasiostachys and Scabrida. But what also popped out in those is that there was another taxon hiding in our San Diego County collections where we had quite a few of them that is much, much shorter in its calyx here and in the fruits as well. I mean, half the size of the 2 varieties. And this is not recognized currently in the Jepsonese flora or anywhere. And it was actually originally described as Verbena abramsii from a specimen in the 1940s on Hot Springs Mountain here in San Diego. And it turns out that we actually have quite a few collections of it. I'm positive it is a different taxon. It should be recognized. And it actually has its own distribution of here in the higher foothills. Not this one, I think that is a bad geopoint, but all these here in the upper foothills and mountains of San Diego County. Now, I don't know how far north it goes or how far south. I didn't find any from Baja California, and we had nothing else in the collection from just above the area. But there's definitely something different in our area. So right now, I would say abramsii is a good taxon that should be recognized. It has really different measurements than the other 2 varieties. Now, also working on some of these contracts, we found a species is not seen very often. There are only 2 historic specimens from our county, and they were quite old, and that is Verbena scabra, the sandpaper vervain. And these are small, tiny flowers, but this was actually found right next to Pendleton on Fallbrook Weapons Station. And so it is, we know it still exists here in the county. Another thing that was bothering me is Hayden's lotus, Aquaspon haydeni, which I always wondered, I thought we were misidentifying a lot of these things. There seemed to be a grade from Aquaspon glaber breviolatus, the short-winged deerweed, to this Hayden's lotus. And so I took a closer look at all the specimens, and I found out that there are significant differences in the flower size and the fruit size. Not only that, but the Jepson E flora and the description is actually not correct. You go back to all the specimens and to the actual type, you will find that the keel does not stick out longer than the rest of the banner or wing petals here. So this is short wing that is common in our county, and it's called short wing because these wings here, breviolatus means short wing in Latin, is longer than this keel that sticks out. And this is about, what, 7.5 or 7.6 millimeters long. This is only 4.5 millimeters long. And it does not have that keel that sticks out. And so cleaning up that we found that haydeni is actually a lot rarer than we thought. And this seed, it only is known here in the Whale Peak area and right in the Mountain Springs Grade area of Imperial County and San Diego. So we did find one individual across the border in Baja California, but it is quite the rare taxon. Another thing that seen for many years, I know many of the botanists that work locally here in San Diego and Orange County as well have known about this thing. And this is a physalis that is not yet described. It's had a lot of names like greeny eye, etc. But even when the treatment came out, I contacted the person who wrote the treatment. I said, this thing does not key out correctly. You can see they look really different than the crassifolia, which is a desert species on the left, and this physalis on the right. And so in our county, the coastal foothill thing is this new species, and this is crassifolia on the other side. Crassifolia is very widespread. It's highly variable. It goes all the way down the peninsula on the Gulf side and back up on the Pacific side to about San Quintin. But this new thing actually goes from Orange County, San Diego, where it has a lot of populations, and then into Baja California to about Ensenada. And so that's something that we'll be working on in the future. Another thing that I want you guys all to think about is a species that we need more information. And this started with Dr. Peter Raven, who contacted me and Bruce Baldwin up at Berkeley and said, how come a lot of these populations of Picaringia, which is a paleo-endemic species, are not forming seeds? And he started this whole question, and then Andy Jones on INAT actually kind of got onto this as well. And actually, I'd like to get him focused on this project, but we need a lot more evidence from the field. And what we found is that var tomentosa on Otay Mountain, which is pretty much restricted to those metavolcanics, is a real hairy thing, and it has lots of good seed set. But we have another strigose thing that occurs on gabbros in our county, and then there's a more glabrous thing that occurs in rest of California. Many of these populations do not produce seed, and we think that they are just existing relics, and they are reproducing after fires, etc., from the original individual. So they're cloning out, but they don't seem to be producing seed. So we're trying to figure out why. So this coming year on iNaturalist, look for this species in the field, look for fruits and seed, and take good pictures of this so we can better understand what's going on with this taxon. Another thing that I did during COVID was I got into looking at Encelias, because Baja California has a rich diversity of Encelias, 13 in fact, and there are 8 that are endemic only to the peninsula. And I started looking at Encelia palmeri, and you can see a specimen of it there. And then I found this collection that I made in 1998 from the Vizcaíno Peninsula area. And I took a closer look and I'm like, this is not Encelia palmeri. I mis-ID'd it. In fact, it's not even an Encelia. It's a Biopsis. And I'm almost positive is completely new species of Biopsis. So as soon as these COVID restrictions go and the weather conditions are right, I'm going to go look for populations of this, see if there is a good one and we can get this thing described. But it seems to be a beautiful silvery leaved form of a Biopsis. Now, recently, Dr. Mike Simpson has also pulled me into, this is called going down the rabbit hole, looking at Cryptanthas. And we will be resurrecting the varieties of Cryptantha marittima because they are very good. They are very clear. And once you know what you're looking for, all of them fall out beautifully. Not only the 3 that were previously published, but a brand new one that we are in the process of describing called var viscanensis. And the interesting part is this part of the peninsula, from Guadalupe Island to the Vizcaino Point, over to this part, over to Bahia Los Angeles. So right about the 27 to 28 parallel is the radiative diversity spot of this thing. All 4 varieties occur there, including marittima was described from Guadalupe Island, var marittima, viscanensis is here, pilosa was described from here, and all of them occur in this area. But they do go on up into the United States, and we have both taxa here, and this kind of shows you the differences in those various varieties. So we'll have that publication out soon. And this shows you some of the differences: larger flowers, 4 ovules versus 2, et cetera, et cetera. We also are resurrecting a really rare species from that same exact region, Natividad Island, and out on the Vizcaino Peninsula, called Cryptantha pondii. It is very different than everything else, and it is only known from 3 historic specimens. So we need to look for that one and find some new populations as well. Now, I was just working today actually on this. It came back from review, is accepted. We're just making some revisions. And this will be a new Cryptantha from the San Quintin area. And this is Cryptantha arenophylla. It is a dune dweller on the dunes of Socorro and San Quintin, if you know those dune fields. And it is a beautiful species, but really quite rare and really threatened because there's a lot of impacts to the dunes in this area. So we're trying to get it out before it is gone. Dr. Vanderplank and myself have been doing some work on the flora of San Clemente Island. And you'd say, we surely know everything on San Clemente, on the California Channel Islands, et cetera. We don't. So working with Mike Simpson, we're looking at some of these collections, and we found now 3 new species to the California Channel Islands. One of them is here, which will be called Clementina. The other one will be called Kinkiensis. And Kinkiensis is the Tongva, the indigenous name for the island of San Clemente. And the other one will be a Catalinensis from Santa Catalina Island. So here's the distribution as we know and its relatives. So soon you'll be seeing these in publication. So see, there are many things that we do not understand yet, and we're still unraveling as far as species in our own backyard. The last thing I want to address is iNaturalist. And many of you know I'm active in that. There are 3 projects: San Diego County, Imperial County, and Flora, Baja California. This gives us a lot of information on things like Jorge here found this new Alternifera, which is new to our county. It's an invasive weed recently, and that just popped up on iNaturalist. People are active, and we use that data. Once I verify it, and we try to pull it into our databases for better understanding of distribution. And one thing that you're going to have to do, join these projects and do this. Make sure that I have access, or the curator of that project has access to the actual coordinates of your observation, or we cannot use those in our projects. And this is why that's important. Here is Xylorhiza orcuttii. We had 1 specimen from this area, but this shows you people here. This is Fred and Carla doing work on Xylorhiza. All these other dots are iNaturalist points. They give us a much more thorough understanding of the distribution and microhabitats, and just what we can do with this iNaturalist data is off the charts if you do good photographs and you give us access to these things. So that's about the last thing I'm going to say, other than make lots of photos on iNaturalist. Don't just give one. Your chance and probability of ID and verification goes up the more photos you have. And we've also created a lot of things to help you learn, like differentiating the 2 Antirrhinum natalianum subspecies. We've created these kind of outreach things to help you, or in this case, serocarpet. So with that, I think I'll quit, and thank you for your attention. There's a lot to be done out there, and I'll answer some questions now. Let me stop my sharing. Okay.
Okay, I'm on there. Yep, I am. Okay, we have a lot of questions. Let me fix. When you stop sharing, it messed up my screen. Oh,
Oh, sorry.
no, that's okay. I did it already, half and half. Oh, okay. So there we go. I like Kim Marsden's question a lot. Where can you get the checklist for San Diego County?
Well, okay, that's just a little push. We have actually almost finished the new checklist. We have all the information. So we have what was the 5th edition, the last one maybe? I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think so.
And a new one needs to come out because of all the name changes and all the additions to our county. It'll happen, but I definitely want to get the Imperial County one out first, which is also done. I just need to write the intro and it'll be out there. So there'll be some new checklists, but you can always get it online. It's available as a PDF, the old last one. Just realize it's not completely up to date.
Yeah, definitely has a lot of additions, which is kind of nice, and changes.
A lot of additions.
Yeah. And someone wanted to know how many taxa we have, species or taxa we have in the county.
I think right now we're approaching, I would say, at least 2,750, maybe 2,800 in our county, which is, you have to realize that's an amazing amount of diversity. That is more diversity than all of Alaska, or basically the northern tier of states in the US. So that is a lot of diversity in our county.
Yeah. Daniel wants to know, what is your favorite rediscovery plant in Baja California Sur?
In Baja California Sur, probably, well, I'd love to rediscover Faxonia that I haven't done yet. I think the most fun for me was Eriogonum graphium, which it's not actually described yet, but it's that Eriogonum that occurred on that granite area. And it's because I was with my Mexican colleagues, and I had to tell you, a big storm had gone through. It was one of those major hurricanes that hit Cabo San Lucas, knocked everything out. It knocked all the roads out. So we had to hike our tails off to get there. And so you saw this peak in the distance, and it took forever to get even close to this peak. But when we got there, and Jose Luis kept saying, it's not going to be there. There's no buckwheats down here. I don't believe it. Must be another Cerro Calaveras because it's a common name. And sure enough, we found it. So it was a very exciting find.
Nice. Okay, John, have you noticed climate change related impacts to Baja plants with the time span of your career? If so, what species come in mind when you're thinking about significant impact?
Well, I have to say, I'm not sure I have seen as much climate change in Baja, and I'm not sure why that is. I think because it's such a large area, it's really difficult for me, only working there for 25, 30 years now, to see that kind of change. But I can tell you, I have seen it in San Diego. I mean, we have seen areas like along the S2 in San Diego, where you see these massive die-offs of juniper and pinions and things that are definitely the result of drought and changes. And I'm sure that is changing the distribution of those species more upward in our areas at that desert transition. Now, I have seen major impacts of the flora over my years in Baja California, and that is mostly from destruction of the habitat, but also livestock and urbanization and introduction of non-natives. That has caused some severe problems in a lot of areas of Baja. And so that kind of change, I think, is even more extreme than what we're seeing as far as climate change right now.
So Cindy wants to know, how do you know if a plant specimen is growing naturally at a location versus if it might have been planted by someone doing vegetation restoration?
You don't. You really don't. A lot of times, well, older restoration part, you can't tell at all. And I mean, because they fill in and you wouldn't know.
Good restoration, you can't
What's
tell.
That?
Good restoration, you can't
Good
tell.
restoration, you shouldn't be able to tell. Although we found some restoration in San Diego that's a little bit older, that planted some species that don't occur here. So exactly. Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem as far as the distribution. Now, it can be really problematic, and restoration areas can be very difficult for us to tell. Like, for example, we see some of these species like Iva hazensiana, Artemisia palmeri, they're being planted farther north than they ever occurred in our county. So we know that that's kind of out of the natural range. but they're still being used in restoration in that area.
In the Hazardia Berbertus.
Oh, that's the one I was thinking of. That it's popping up all over
Yeah, it's
in San Diego County.
So Daniel wants to know, John, have you thought about deploying drones to help research? He talks more, but that's generally what he's asking. Drones.
I have not. I don't have time for that. But I will have more mules. I'd actually like to have a helicopter myself to get to some remote areas. It's getting harder and harder for me to keep hiking. Yeah. Getting harder to get to the remote areas. But and I'll tell you, in Baja, I should bring this up. One of the significant problems, I always say, it was easier to do this in 1870s than it is now. And you're like, what? You got four-wheel drives, you got highways. Yes, but there are very few people that live on the remote ranches any longer, and they don't use animals all the time. So the trails are getting overgrown. People don't know how to use the animals and actually use the trails to get us to those really remote spots. So it's a major problem in some of the remote areas of Baja.
Mm-hmm. So Matt Berger wants to know, how many species do you estimate are still to be discovered in Baja California?
Well, I can tell you, I don't have that little slide right here, but I think I put a thing down recently. There were I think over the last 10 years, all of us together described 28 new plants for the peninsula. But then I have another slide that actually shows about 38 that are not described that I'm aware of. And I have a lot of them are in my cabinets, and I'm working on them. I'm working on many of them, and I'm trying to farm them out, get them to people so we can get this stuff described. But there's a lot to be done. And I really just want to explore more.
Yeah, everyone does. Matthew Hecht wants to know if material was taken from the plant species that were rediscovered, and any new species that were discovered to propagate the species for conservation purposes to ensure.
That's a good question. And that's where the project with the zoo and with the people in Unam on this seed banking project is really important, and Dr. Vanderplank as well. She's kind of been the thing steering that entire project. And it is not just, we do have, our intent is to go back to these places where I found these really rare things that were on this list of mine and actually seed bank those. Now, a lot of those have not been done yet. We are still seed banking very rare things. And I can tell you, we have already seed banked some of the species that aren't described that are really ultra rare. So even though they don't have a name formally on them yet, we do have a conservation seed bank of some of those things. But there's a lot of work to be done on seed banking yet. And all this stuff is not growing yet. So all our permits, my permits are all about scientific specimens. We have separate permits for seed banking, but we don't bring any of it across the border. It all goes to Mexico City and then on to Kew Gardens, et cetera. So it's where it should be for conservation.
And the seed banking is through San Diego Zoo Global
Correct.
In Baja California and in San Diego. They're working on both sides.
And the Center for Plant Conservation, CPC, they do an amazing job in the US, and it's kind of all branched off of the zoo project.
Justin Daniels wants to know how many of the 300,000 INAT observations, which I think is more than that, it's not 300,000, and confirmations have contributed to the CNPS Plant Atlas project.
The CNPS Plant Atlas project.
Yeah. So I just think how many of 300,000 are for Plant Atlas?
Oh, for San Diego Plant Atlas, I can tell you that, well, 300, I think 302 or 303,000. That includes the Baja and Imperial, but those numbers are very low because they don't have as many active workers. So I think over 200,000 for San Diego County Plant Atlas alone. So just for our Plant Atlas data. And we pull that, once I verify it, no matter what anybody else says, we just pull in what I ID it as. And we pull that data in, and that goes into our database, and you can map it with specimens. So we get a really good idea of distribution.
Rose wants to know, is bajaflora.org bilingual?
It is not yet. That would be a huge undertaking. I would love to have it done that way. But I have to tell you, we've had basically zero funding for Baja Flora ever. Early on, I got some money to develop this because we had tens of thousands of cactus and succulent photos that were taken by Reed Moran and George Lindsay and Norm Roberts. And I got some cactus and succulent enthusiasts to actually put up money for that. And we digitized them and they're available online. And that's what created Baja Flora. But it is actually just boomed, it has exploded into a massive site. And so it would be wonderful to have it bilingually, but it will require money and a lot more. I would have to have some staffing actually for that as well.
Yeah, John's staff is definitely bare bones for the amount of work you do, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah, yeah. I have one person, John Sanborn, part-time, who does both Baja Flora and the Plant Atlas website, and he's done an off-the-charts amazing amount of work. And it is both
money.
sites. What's that?
With little money.
With almost no money.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bruce says, amazing work, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Are you concerned that providing coordinates will enable poaching or the willful destruction of populations by landowners who don't want to be bothered by restrictions?
That's a good question. I think that in this day and age, to be totally honest, the information is out there. So for Baja, I mean, are we talking Baja or San Diego? Very different ways of it. In San Diego, I'm not as worried as much. We have a lot more oversight, et cetera. Baja California is a massive area. And I can tell you that some of these things like cactus and succulent coordinates, we have to be very careful about that. They cannot get out. Even when we publish some of these species, we don't actually publish the coordinates of them. So some we have to hide because there are people in the world that actually seek out those to grow ornamentally. They are really major enthusiasts of those plants. And that impacts some of those populations. We've seen it in Baja on things like, well, Echinocereus lindsay is a good example in Baja. Basically, it almost got wiped out by collecting and of these things. So yes, we have to be very careful about that. But to be honest, the data is out there. And herbaria and our scientific collections, we're trying to get our information out there. It needs to be out there because it's being used in much better ways these days. So we need more oversight and people looking after those, and definitely if any problems come up, but the information is out there, unfortunately.
Let's see. Have you ever consulted curanderos and indigenous communities who may be familiar with medicinal properties of native plants?
That's a good question. I've done very little work in that, except in Baja California. Remember, most of my guides are actually local vaqueros, and they are people that live in remote areas, and they have uses for all the plants. And so I record all the information onto the scientific specimens that I collect, and that is there, and it is part of my notes and that. And I ask them, do you use this plant? Do you have a name for it? All of that goes into my notes and onto the specimen. But a lot of that is not my field, ethnobotany. I'm just trying to put a name on it, figure out what it's related to, et cetera. So that's somebody else that needs to take up that. And there's been some really good ethnobotanical work in Southern Baja, at least, but there's still a lot to be done.
So David Greenberger wants to know, are there any Baja serpentine plants you're still trying to relocate?
There's one we're naming, a brand new Matalea that occurs on the serpentines of the Vizcaino. It is a strange little thing that we're in the process of naming with Mark Fishbein and a graduate student that worked on that group. But I'm not sure. There are definitely things on some of the serpentines of like Magdalena Bay on Santa Margarita Island that we need more access to see what is still there. There's some species that are probably serpentine endemics out there, but we haven't found them. And that's now a military island. It's not held by the same stuff as the rest of the island. So access is a little more problematic for this. So there are definitely things there that need to be looked for.
Okay, the last question, a couple people want to know, would you please show the slide that tells us the different stages of a plant to photograph for INAT? I mean, you have another place they can go look, right? Where is that?
Well, I'm not sure that I do. Of the Picaringia, maybe? Is that what we're talking about?
No, INAT, just how do you take photos in INAT? Like how you take the
yes.
photo?
Oh, no, there are actually a lot of things. But if you go to the San Diego County Plant Atlas project on iNaturalist, we have a little guide to tell you how to make good observations, what you should take. Actually, we have it for every species or every genus at the very least. Like make sure you take fruits of astragalus and all that kind of stuff. So there is really good info on how to do it on our Plant Atlas website page. And it's a post that's older. So go check that out on iNaturalist and it'll give you some really good info on how to make good observations online.
Okay. Well, I wish we had more time. You have lots more questions. So yeah, maybe the next talk they can ask them again. So thank you, Dr. Rebman, for an excellent talk as usual. And remember, if you're interested in supporting John's research, then please feel free to donate using the link provided in the chat, or you can go to the CNPS San Diego chapter website and there'll be a link there. And so, as we mentioned, this money will go to be supporting his staff. So all those maps that you've seen and the websites, Baja Flora and the San Diego Plant Atlas project, that will be supporting those projects. So thank you for a fun evening and good night.
Thank you all for your attention.